Welcome to Playful Beginnings, a podcast about the magic of play therapy for therapists, students, and anyone interested. In our podcast, we'll explore the deeper understanding of play therapy and the skills we use when working with children.
We hope to help you understand the why behind what we do and how it helps kids heal and grow. I'm Dr. Christy Opiola, a working play therapist and university professor in North Carolina.
I'm Dr. Maggie Parker, a play therapist and professor in DC. Hey, Christy.
Hey, Maggie, how are you?
I'm good. I'm excited to continue this conversation on ADHD.
I know. And what does this look like from a CCPT perspective? What are we doing and how are we helping kids with ADHD in the playroom and really understanding the theoretical and conceptual things that we do and how that helps kids with ADHD?
Absolutely. And again, shout out to Tisha Moon and Family and Child Place. I can't remember, in Vienna, Virginia. Sorry, Tisha, Dr. Amanda Van Amberg, because they kind of brought this to us and we talked about it with executive functioning, but also here, Tisha Moon also has like really funny play therapy Instagrams about like ADHD. So shout out to her. Yeah. So, okay. So Christy, thinking about CCPT and ADHD, how do you kind of conceptualize this overarching, and then we can kind of go into the specifics?
Oh gosh, overarching. Why do I always get the hard question first, Maggie?
Give it to me. Because my ADHD puts me in fear of there being quiet space, so I take control. So you give it to me. You tell me.
No.
You're in charge of it.
Okay. I can do it. It caught me off guard. Well, I think for me, when I think about child-centered and ADHD, what we're really working on is not the behavioral components that we see. Not that those don't get worked on, right? But we're really looking at more of like the emotional, relational process that sometimes can be intensified because of ADHD.
Mm-hmm.
And so what we're really supporting is more the child holistically instead of just focusing and correcting or redirecting or punishing poor behavior. What we're wanting to do is to have more relational connection and helping them understand and having them felt heard and understood and accept it, right? And we believe with those components that what will happen is the ADHD behaviors will decrease in frequency and in intensity within the play space.
Yeah.
What about for you?
I mean, I think it's that. I think as we talked about last week, one of the things that I think is so helpful about CCPT and working with all children, but specifically with kids who feel like they're being told over and over and over again that they're not okay. And with CCPT, the fundamental belief that you are okay and that I trust you and I believe in you is a message that's not always given to children in general, but then especially to kids with ADHD. And so one of the things I think about often when I do play therapy that really resonates, I think here, is when I accept you for who you are, I give you permission to change. And when we're in a school setting, it's not really about accepting you as you are. It's saying change what you're doing so that you can fit into the system. And that makes it really hard to do anything really, I think, intrinsically, because you're so worried about it's not for you, it's for other people. That's that external. And so when you come into the play space with that underlying acceptance and belief, that does then help you identify for yourself, or a child identify for themselves, what is helpful and beneficial for them to engage in emotional regulation or control, or how can they build their self-confidence in those ways that's internally driven with acceptance and being able to try things out and be new in spaces that maybe didn't, that there's no judgment there and that the consequences are really small.
Yeah,
I think
I would agree.
It's a long answer.
No, I think it's a good answer. It really like highlights that idea of the relational component of CCPT and how when we use things unconditional positive regard and we use empathic attunement and co-regulation, right? That can be really supportive for the child in the play space, especially for children who have ADHD, who may hear a lot of messages about not being able to control themselves, not being acceptable to other people, right? That the play space gives them a chance to freely express themselves where they can act out a lot of the big emotions that they have and may not have total awareness that they're not like, I don't want to use regulating because I think it's overused, but they sometimes don't know how to stop those bigger emotions or when is a good time that I need to maybe put that emotion aside, where the playroom will give them an opportunity to practice those skills with someone who is accepting, with someone who can then also reflect and let them know, right? You're feeling frustrated. You are really angry right now. You are really excited. Whatever the feeling might be, right? Not only does that help the child label, but it also helps them recognize what they're experiencing internally. And like if that doesn't match what they're thinking's happening, right, then they can potentially practice altering that if they want to in the playroom, right? That's where the freedom comes to play.
Yeah. And I think a lot of times when I work with, I think where some, and we're going to go through this, I might be jumping the gun a little bit, but
Nope. Jump.
it's, well, just are you teaching them? And how is this going to work if they're not, if there's no, if there's acceptance and child led, then how are these things going to show up if what, where it comes into problem is when there are rules or when there are structures. So I think sometimes when I hear those things, it might sow some seeds of doubt in myself. And I'm like, maybe I do need to do. And the reality is that accepting them doesn't mean that it's permissive of everything, right? It's a trust that is shared and understood, hopefully, and experienced so that they can try things that might be scary without feeling as if we're going to get them in trouble. And I'm
Well,
not saying
I
it
think
right. Like, yeah,
no, no, no. I think you are. And I think the other thing that like really spoke to me when you were sharing that, Maggie, was this implied that there is no structure within CCPT. That it's just it's kind of it's a shared experience. I think sometimes if there's any Montessori teachers or Montessori kids, that there's this belief that there's no structure in Montessori either, right? Which is not true. It's just the environment is set up for the structure. And there is structure within CCPT. And so this idea that kids always need to be taught something and teaching requires control from the adult, I think is what really stood out to me, where I think kids get a lot of that, especially kids with ADHD. They're trying to be controlled by so many people that how and when do they learn within themselves that they have the ability to control, make decisions, do some of that stuff. So I think for me within the play space that exists, right? And it may feel permissive to some people, but for children within the playroom, I think they both feel like they have a sense of control, but there are boundaries and limits within the play space.
yeah. And I think sharing that with caregivers is really helpful.
Yes.
That
And an
this,
important quality that is happening in the playroom. Yeah.
yeah. And so I think when I also when I do this when I'm teaching play therapy more, and maybe I should bring it in when I'm working with the caregivers and teachers, but I think about they already have people in their lives that are teaching them things and that are regulating these aspects and helping them get study skills or self-control in that way. And I just get to be someone different. I don't want to take on those roles. So for these 45 minutes, yes, it will be different than what you're experiencing out there, but different doesn't mean that it's bad. It's just, it's an adjunctive thing. Like you guys are already, you're doing what you need, what you're doing in those spaces. And I'm going to do this in my space. And this is why we're different. And this is how that's beneficial.
Yeah.
And just how can I be a different, how can I show up differently? I think sometimes I have to remind myself that too when parents are, can you teach them this? I can see how you would want me to, right? And that's not my belief system. There are, I'm guessing you're probably doing that at home and you're doing that at school, teaching different learning techniques and skills and study. And this is what I do and how it's different. And this is why I think it's helpful.
But I also think we are teaching, but we're
Being just
teaching
different.
experientially, right? So kids are learning these skills within the playroom experientially compared to verbally or having to reiterate. We're giving them the opportunity to see and sit in what does it look like to pause between an idea and an impulse to action, right? What does that look like in the playroom? What does it look like? I don't know, I was trying to think of another one. What does it look like to sit within really hard feelings? What does it feel like? And then also, what does it look like to have a desire and have to think through options to that desire to get that need met in socially acceptable ways? Those are all taught in the playroom. They're just taught experientially and within relationship instead of authority down.
Right. I absolutely. They're getting to experience in there.
Yeah. And without it always being external, right? I think that that's the one thing that I really appreciate about CCPT is it's really an internally driven experience for the kids so it does boost self-esteem. It does boost their ability to know that they can do these things instead of always getting the message that they can't and they need to be controlled externally.
Yeah. And so when we're providing that unconditional and positive regard, the empathic attunement structure of like predictability, not structure as what to do, that it helps in some ways reduce some of that stress and that arousal
Mhm.
because it's predictable and it's safe in some ways, right? I don't want to ever say that like I create a safe environment because I can't 100% say that people feel safe in my presence, but it's helping them because by reducing that stress and that arousal system, then you're able to kind of go through some of these self-regulation, that co-regulation that can happen if I'm calm, then you're calm. And sometimes these ADHD symptoms can get increased when you're stressed out.
Yeah.
And so hopefully through the relationship, some of that can help as well.
I think there's also a rhythm to play therapy that then kids get accustomed to the rhythm in the room, which is, I think, what you were just speaking to, Maggie, within the play space and within being in a relationship. So that attunement, that how there is a rhythm. And when we're both in rhythm together, I think that's when kind of magic happens in the playroom. I don't know,
Yeah.
but that's what I was kind of thinking. And I think through skills, not for the rhythm, but for impulse control and some of the stuff you were talking about, things like our limit setting, our ACT model, right? And this is, I think, the struggle for play therapists is sometimes limits are really hard to set and challenging. And so, like, how can we be consistent with them and how can we be firm and empathic at the same time for kiddos and still have acceptance? Because sometimes kids can be very surprising and it puts us off or it takes us out of focus a little bit. And so, and I think that's the other cool thing that happens within CCPT is there are ruptures and repairs throughout the whole time. And so there, as an adult in the room, I'm able to take responsibility for my own action to help them learn how to do some responsibility taking for themselves, right? When mistakes happen and we're all fallible, we're all human. But I do think children with ADHD feel like they're more fallible than other children.
Yeah. And I think that, yeah, you're modeling that. I also think if we were to kind of like go through some of the skills and what CCPT looks like, you're saying with limit setting, it's self-control, it's boundaries, it's
Responsibility,
personal responsibility, choices, making choices, internal locus of control,
decision making.
decision making. There's so many things that I think limit setting is awesome. But
Yeah.
even also, not but even empathic listening, right? Like that's huge because if you feel misunderstood or corrected or scolded, and instead you have someone in there who's responding to what you're communicating, whether that be through your impulsivity or your behaviors or your facial expressions, then that can really help them feel seen and heard, which then helps with some of that emotional reactivity. And so it's like you're really trying hard to make it work. You're frustrated when it's not going how you want. Something that helps also increase their emotional awareness, which then can help them increase their emotional regulation. And so that empathic listening is so important when working with kiddos with ADHD.
Yeah. I was also thinking as you were talking how many power struggles may be involved for kids with ADHD and how the playroom can really give them a greater sense of control where we're not competing for control, right? But we are using limits when they're needed or choice giving to eliminate the need for control-seeking behaviors and how that may help with impulsivity, because some of impulsivity may be connected to the world is feeling out of control and I'm trying to take control over this space. I don't know.
Yeah. Something that I found interesting from the research that I hadn't really thought about before, but makes perfect sense is with tracking and how it can help with ADHD. Because a lot of times what you're talking about with that impulsivity is that you're doing things without realizing that you're doing them. And you're just kind of like, and as
But when we reflect, right, content and when we are tracking behavior, it brings those things to light. It's, I didn't even know I was doing that.
I didn't even recognize, right? And it's a mirror. And sometimes it can feel, I don't know about you, Chris, even as an adult, have you noticed you do this? Can feel really judgmental.
Yes.
And so if we are truly that CCPT, unconditional positive regard, and we are being the mirror, it can be more of an insight than, oh, shoot, I should change.
Yeah,
Because we're
it
not
takes the
saying
shame
that
out
they,
of all of it. Yeah.
right. We're not saying you should change. We're just saying, oh, you decided something else. You're really doing this. You're going over there. And also kind of can reinforce too when they are focused. You're determined, you're working hard, you are building that as high as you can. And that also is helping that child kind of recognizing what their capacities that can increase their self-esteem. It can increase their ability to their grit and tenacity to do hard things. It can help them recognize that I'm paying attention to the things that I like. And that's okay. And actually, I am still good at this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and that makes me think about executive functioning and how the playroom really helps to develop executive functioning skills for kids, right? But especially for kids who are told that they don't plan ahead and they're too impulsive and all these things, how CCPT can really be helpful and they can get opportunities through play to practice. What does it feel like to plan something? What traditionally happens? What are cause and effect components, right? And how do I problem solve when things don't go my way? And how do I manage frustration tolerance and all of those other things? So it's helping the neural pathways within the brain in a very non-threatening, playful environment, which I think is really important.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm trying to think about some of these other skills and how they align. Let's
Mm.
see. Even returning, we've kind of talked about returning responsibility, right? And that autonomy, that self-efficacy.
I think it's team building and like they may not hear often that they're good at something. They hear a lot what they're doing wrong, right? So team building I think is really important and encouragement that they can figure it out is also incredibly important for
And that we trust and believe that they can figure it out, that we're
Mhm.
not going to take over because it's
Or
taking
tell them or show them how it all works that and as a play therapist, I'm okay for them to get it wrong a million and one times. No, that's what the playroom is for. And so, can they stick with it and kind of that grit and tenacity? They have it in some places, but sometimes when things aren't working, that's not where they tend to have it.
Mhm. And like, okay, so we got it wrong.
Yeah.
Okay, here we are. What is that? And being able to experience. And that's what I think we kind of started talking about too. And you've said it so eloquently before in this podcast of this is a place where there are small consequences if it's not the way you thought. And it's, oh, I can survive. This doesn't mean that I'm a terrible person. This does not mean that I am dumb. This does not mean anything. It just means that I didn't get that to stay the way I wanted it to.
Yeah. And I think a lot of people in kids' lives have that belief that kids can figure it out, but their verbal communication may not illustrate that to children, right? So I think within child-centered, the congruence of both our verbal and nonverbal statements can really help kids internalize the messages that are being sent and maybe counter messages that they're hearing in other environments.
Mhm.
And I'm not saying that to like shame or guilt those other environments. They're just not set up in that same way, right? We get the luxury for 45 minutes every week to really kind of hone in and really convey these core messages to children so that they can hear it, experience it. So when you do it in another environment, then they are apt to hearing it too.
Right. And I think yeah, it's so hard. And I hear the way I talk to my kids and I know all of this stuff. I'm like, gosh, wouldn't it be nice if I could be like just for 45 minutes be their play therapist and be able to talk to them this way, and I can't. It's not. And I try and do it as much as I can, but it's hard. It's hard to have this. And I want to reiterate too, as a play therapist, especially a play therapist with ADHD, it's hard for me to give this
Mhm.
in the room. It takes a lot of focus and energy and purpose. I'm very purposeful, and I think sometimes we think that this is just easy, and it's not. It's really hard.
It is hard.
It's really hard.
And yeah, it's just a different day-to-day interaction. What we get to be in outside of the playroom does look slightly different than what it looks like in the playroom.
Yeah.
And there's not also the emotional, I care about my clients, but they're not my kids,
Right.
right? There's something different about it being your child than it being someone else's child that I get to leave a small fingerprint on, where you have a major footprint in your child's life, where my hope is I'm going to help them as much as possible and then get them to their environment that's going to continue to be able to support that. That
Mhm.
is, we are going to get to invite Amy Work, who's doing a lot of work with ADHD and play therapy. She's going to be on next week. And she is doing a lot with parents and ADHD, parents who have children with ADHD, and how do we support them to counter these narratives at home, and really looking at CPRT. But her passion is really ADHD, both in the playroom and her work with parents. So I'm excited for her to come
Yeah.
next week and share a little bit about her passions, as well as like kind of the research areas that she's really interested in and what she's found in the research and what she's going to be studying here starting this spring. So,
Yeah. No, I think this, I hope this is helpful. I just like really quickly before we kind of wrap up, because I know it's time. One thing that I hadn't thought of when we were talking about limit setting and how it's helpful. Well, it also helps with that impulse control because there's sometimes delayed gratification. And I
yeah.
think that's really hard for kids. And so just kind of reminding. And so what I hope that our listeners heard is how each we're not changing the skills based on the diagnoses, but we can match up how they're helpful in different ways and what the skills stay the same, the belief system stays the same, and how we may communicate it or how it may be experienced may be different based upon what the child is experiencing in the room. And
And I,
above all diagnosis is the individual child.
and I was going to say, it also sometimes how we conceptualize what's happening,
Mm-hmm.
right? What is my intentionality of using this skill with this kid with their presenting concerns compared to another child with other presenting concerns? Right? It is going to shift a little bit, although I might be talking about the same skills, how I talk about them may be slightly different to parents. And so there we do ebb and flow in our description and why we're using different things based on what the presenting concerns are for a kiddo. And
Yeah.
as we talked about in the last episode, right? Like each kid presents so differently with ADHD. So I may not be talking about every skill we talked about today in the playroom, or I may, but I might be talking about them slightly differently depending on the presenting concern. So if a
Yeah.
kid has a lot more externalizing behaviors than internalizing behaviors, I might use the skills slightly differently. So my intentionality in the room might be a little different.
Yeah.
Still, it's all undergirded with the same belief system, right? That I really believe in children. They carry a lot of worth. They should be treasured and prized. I want to help them feel understood. All of that's going to stay the same, but how I go about doing that might be slightly different.
Yeah. No. I think this is just really helpful. It's helpful for me to talk about it.
Yeah. We've been excited for this kind of new area. We've been planning it for a little bit, and so we're excited that it's getting started. And stay tuned. We're gonna be talking about some other things too here.
Yeah.
And so
So let us know. You can email us at info@playtherapyspace.com or Maggie or Christy at playtherapyspace.com. You're welcome to direct message us from the Play Therapy Space on Instagram or Play Therapy Space on Facebook. We're on Threads. We're still trying to figure out social media. So if there are things that we could post that would be helpful for you,
let us know. We're
how
also
I'm
two
doing.
full-time working individuals, so please have grace with us too. We're trying to learn how to balance all of this. This little pet project of ours, Playful Beginnings podcast. Also, please like us and subscribe
Yeah.
below. And we can't wait to see you next week. We hope you have a wonderful week.
Yeah. Thanks, Christy.
Bye, Max.
Bye.